Hey guys, welcome back. Today I will be trying out this Etchr sketchbook and also a set of their brushes. They did send this to me to try out, but this video isn't sponsored and I'm really excited. I think this might be my first introduction to the brand, if I'm not mistaken. They asked me whether I preferred hot or cold pressed paper, and this time I actually asked them to send me hot pressed paper because I'm so used to cold pressed watercolor paper and I already have so many of that I wanted to try something new, and also something that would work better for gouache rather than just for watercolors. So I really can't wait. This is pure cotton paper and it's about 6 by 8 inches, which I think is just a perfect sketchbook size. And the brushes come in this brush holder roll, which I think it looks beautiful, and the brushes themselves look beautiful. I think that first impressions, I think that the handles are just the right length, and also just by feel, the bristles feel really soft, but we're going to be trying that out later on. As expected from a hot pressed watercolor sketchbook, sketching on this feels great. One thing is that I really don't like about cold pressed watercolor papers is how it feels when I'm sketching on them. Usually it would feel like I'm just shaving away at my pencils when I sketch on them, and so for this it was a joy. It was great to do the primary sketch that I did, and it was also great to do the darker pencil on top. And also when it came to the actual painting, I just really love this. I think I might actually prefer hot pressed watercolor paper now, at least with what I'm trying to do with my paintings in this moment. I really love the effect of the hot pressed paper and my watercolors, and especially these Paul Rubens one. I think they're just a great pair, and one reason for that is a lot of these Paul Rubens watercolors are actually very granulating, and so when you put it on top of this paper, it just looks like there's so many different textures that you can get out of them. And especially when you add a lot of water to your watercolors, it just looks like those little granules are dancing on top of the paper, and I just really love this effect. A few weeks ago, I was talking about how I watched a lot of Jane Betta's watercolor videos, and I was so inspired by how she just lays down colors so fearlessly, and how she just lets the watercolors dance across the paper. And I said that I was gonna try that for my own techniques, but I never really got to try at least the way she does that. I think a lot of it has to do with the paper that I have. So cold pressed paper, you have just so much control. It just grips onto the watercolors that they don't really flow that much on top of the paper, and usually you need to nudge them around to get them somewhere where you want them to go. I'm not really sure what kind of paper Jane uses, but for me to get this much movement on my paper, I just really needed this paper to get that kind of look. I just really, really love how those watercolors moved on top of this Etchr paper. And I think it was because of that I was so inspired to use so many dark and just even contrasting colors. I think mentally this paper helped me be more brave with what I put on top of it. And also just how much watercolor I'm putting on top of my paper. Usually at this stage, at these very first stages and in these very first layers when I'm painting with watercolors, I try not to add too much watercolor and just add a lot of water in them so I can get a better idea of just me planning the colors and trying to see what the colors would look like next to each other. But this time I was just so amazed by how the watercolors move that I just wanted to see so much of them. So there's a lot more watercolor in this first few layers and in this painting than what I would normally add in my initial layers of my other paintings. And one other thing that I almost forgot to mention that is very important is that this paper just refuses to warp. So it's not actually as thick as my other pure cotton watercolor papers. This one I think is just 220 GSM. So I expected this to warp, but one thing I didn't do was tape it down just because I forgot to, but I was really planning on taping it because I really expected this to just warp with how much water I was planning to add on the painting. But it didn't warp at all, and I'm so impressed by that because I just really was so ready for this to dry in a certain way. But even when it was wet, it didn't really warp, even though this painting actually has a lot more water than my other paintings would have, because there are a lot of moments especially in the first few layers where I was just so enchanted by how the watercolors move that I even added water on top of them just so I can see them spread around on the paper. But I'm so impressed that it didn't warp. And also I prefer this exact same thickness for watercolor sketchbooks. I don't know what it is about watercolor sketchbooks that make me just so intimidated to use them. I already have a few watercolor sketchbooks that even though I love painting on them, that I'm just too scared to actually sketch with them, and especially just explore different ideas with them because it feels like they're so intimidating and I would need to save them for more finished pieces. But this one, I think it might be because of the thickness, it just feels a little bit thicker than my normal sketchbooks. I love that so much about this. And one other thing that I love about this paper is how I'm still able to move the watercolors. I can manipulate where I want them to go while they're wet and while I'm still working on them, but as soon as they're dry, they're just not as easy to move around. So I love that I can move them while I'm working with them, but also that the paper doesn't also make it seem like the watercolors are just sitting on top of the paper and they could still reactivate when you add more layers on top. So it's not like that. I think it's just a perfect mix of being so smooth that it allows movement on top, but it also holds onto the watercolors once they're dry. And because of that, and also because of the fact that it's not as thick as other watercolor sketchbooks, and also because of its size, I think all of those things just make this be the perfect sketchbook to actually sketch on with watercolors. So now I want to talk about these brushes, and I've already said that I think the handles are just the perfect length, because a lot of the times brush handles actually become either too long or too short. So I think this is the perfect length, and also the bristles themselves are just so great for gouache, because these top layers are actually gouache, but also I think they're good for watercolors as well. And it's a very personal thing, but I like snappier brushes like this for watercolors, because sometimes I think softer brushes are too floppy to get much control out of them. So these brushes are perfect because they're just soft enough to be, and they're actually softer than The brushes that I normally use for gouache, they just feel really soft, but they're also just snappy, and it makes it very easy to control them. But there is one thing that I can say about this set, and I just think that the smallest brushes they have is not fine enough. Maybe it's just because I am painting on a very small size paper that getting these details in will be hard anyway, but it was really hard for me to get really fine details with the smallest brushes they have. I think that's the only thing I can say about them. I think these brushes themselves are very close to perfect, but I just think that the set would need maybe a finer sized brush. But that's very personal. I know maybe a lot of people would get a full use out of this set, but for someone who works on smaller pieces, you might still want to get a smaller brush as a companion to this set. As for this piece, I will be uploading the full unedited walkthrough in my Patreon. I did a poll on which reference photo I was gonna draw, and this one won. So if you guys want to see that, I will be leaving the link to it in the description. So that is it for my review on the Etchr sketchbook and also their gouache brush set. I know this video also took so long, but I actually finished this a couple of days after I uploaded my last video. The reason why this one took so long to upload was because we are actually doing some small renovations in our house, and I'm moving my art stuff and into another room, so I didn't have the time to do the voiceover. But I'm actually taking a couple of Domestika courses that I really can't wait to share with you guys. I will be doing a video on that, and I also have soft pastels that I can't wait to review. So there's a lot of things coming, so thank you everyone for being so patient with me. Thank you especially to my patrons for supporting me, and everyone else who's watching this, thank you for making it to the end, and I will be seeing you guys again soon.